a taster of the study that is focused on education pathways for marginalised adolescent girls beyond formal education. And you're very privileged to be able to have this advanced warning of this study, as it has not yet been released. We're expecting it to be released in the next month or so. And given that you are all here online, we will definitely be sending you the links as soon as they're live, unless you contact us and say you don't want to receive them. But we will have your contact details given you've signed up for this webinar. There are a number of other reports, as I mentioned, and a colleague will be putting in the chat, or has put in the chat, the link to the reports that have already been published. As usual with these webinars, we would really welcome any comments, questions, etc. And please do put those in the chat as we go along, because colleagues can help to respond to them as we go along, and then we will have a question and answer time once we have had the presentations. So we would really welcome that engagement. So Asma, if you go to the next slide. To give a quick overview of the structure of today's session, this is me introducing myself. I'm Pauline Rose at the University of Cambridge and the Technical Director of the Independent Evaluation. Dr. Asma Zubairi will then present the study findings in 10 minutes. For those that you know, these reports are very detailed, so doing this in 10 minutes is a challenge, but hopefully it gives a flavour. And then we're really excited that we're going to have reflections on the findings from the implementing partners that are part of the case studies for this report that Asma will be mentioning briefly shortly. So we're looking forward to hearing from Elisa, Collins and Willem in relation to that. And then we're really happy also to be hearing from Erin Mariam, who is the director of BRAC Institute of Education and Development in Bangladesh, who has been following the report closely as well as having a lot of experience herself. And then we will lead into questions and answers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Asma. Over to you, Asma.
Thank you, Pauline, and thank you to all of you that are online as well. So I am going to be giving you a short overview of the study and some of the findings that have come out from the study. But before I do that, I'd just like to give you a bit of a taster as to what the study is about. So we are specifically focusing on the Leave No Girl Behind projects, which fall under the Girls' Education Challenge, of which there are 14. And these specifically target those girls who are out of school, either those who have never been to school or who dropped out early. And our main objective is to really explore the perspectives, agency and choices of the most marginalised girls, to try and understand how it is that these projects have met their needs and also increased their opportunities relating to their education and livelihood journeys. So, as I said, there's 14 Leave No Girl Behind projects, and so the study looks at an overview of these in terms of the portfolio-wide review, and this really looks at external evaluation data to, for instance, see how the projects have affected girls' learning outcome as a consequence of participating. And we'll also focus on 3 LNGB studies in Ghana, Kenya and Nepal, where we collected primary data from. So just before I go into some of the findings, I would just like to give an overview of, I guess, the design of the Leave No Girl Behind project. So as I've mentioned, they target the most marginalised girls who are out of school and who are also of adolescent age, so ages 10 to 19. Once the projects have targeted those girls are enrolled in a learning centre, and you can see the Girls' Education Challenge typology of the types of education programmes beyond formal schooling are provided. But it's not only that period that the projects support girls, they also support them in their transitions to either formal education, skills training, or employment opportunities. So one of the things that we're often asked is actually who are the most marginalised? And one of the things, just to say up front, is that these projects work across a number of different countries, across many contexts. So there's no standard definition of what the most marginalised actually mean. But as we were doing the study, what you see in front of you in terms of the different characteristics of marginalisation, these were some of the more common characteristics of the marginalised girls that the projects targeted. And what was really positive is that the projects actually did all target the most marginalised girls in the context within which the projects were operating. What we found, however, in the course of the research was, whilst that's really positive that they were able to target the most marginalised, in terms of the original design, there were some cases where specific girls with specific vulnerabilities, i.e. those who had never been to school, maybe the numbers that were reached were less than what the projects had originally targeted because they couldn't be reached. So we're not really going to focus much on the methods, but I do just want to focus on a method that we use for this study, which really helped centre girls' perspectives, their voices, given that that's so central to the study. So you'll see an example in front of you of a River of Life participatory tool, which essentially gets participants to chart their livelihood journeys using the metaphor of a river. And in this case, we ask girls to do this in the context of their education and livelihood journeys. And we ask them to do this from the period before they join the LNGB or the Leave No Girl Behind project, all the way to what their future aspirations may be in the future. So now we move on to the findings. So one thing overall that's really positive is that starting from a low baseline, a lot of the girls, this is an average across the LNGB portfolio, but you see that there are real improvements in girls' literacy and numeracy levels between baseline and end line or follow-up. And what's particularly interesting here is that girls who had never been to school prior to joining the Leave No Girl Behind project, they actually started off at lower levels of learning, but their learning levels were actually higher at the end of the them participating in the project. And one of the things that came out time and time again when interviewing girls was how this improvement in their learning levels actually helped them in their confidence levels, as you can see in the quote from the yellow box. And on confidence and aspirations, this was another positive aspect of the project. So girls through their rivers of life or the interviews identified how it was that the Leave No Girl Behind projects helped in terms of giving them the confidence or the voice to make decisions, for instance, relating to household decisions or larger life matters, for instance, relating to marriage. So again, you see in the green bubble an example of a girl showing that she actually had voice over delaying her marriage. And then, as well as confidence, what the River of Life and interviews also allowed us to do was see how the Leave No Girl Behind had helped in shaping girls' future aspirations. So again, there's an example here of a girl who went on to tailoring, who before didn't have aspirations, but as a consequence of joining the Leave No Girl Behind project, she now wants to pursue a vocation in tailoring. Now, the Leave No Girl Behind project has many activities which directly target girls, but there are also those that target community and government stakeholders to change the embedded gender norms which often prevent girls from participating in education. So again, all the projects addressed this through sensitization campaigns. And there's a really great example of one of the projects where the change champions, who are leaders in the community, i.e. religious leaders, worked with the projects to actually work with community members to delay child marriage, as an example. And then it wasn't just the direct interventions with communities, but also what communities were able to perceive in terms of what girls were capable of. So in many examples, for instance, girls were bringing in income. They had skills that were valued by the community. And as a consequence, that really shifted perceptions of what girls were capable of too. So I've mentioned that there were two phases when they were in the Learning Centre, but also LNGB projects helping girls in their transitions. So this also proved to be really integral to success. So often when girls transition to education or work-related opportunities, they were supported financially or with skills training. And what you have, like a few girls actually indicated this, that the skills that they were given by the Leave No Girl Behind project also allowed them to use the money to kind of diversify their businesses in case of adverse economic conditions. But also it helped girls feel more respected because of their skills being valued, and as a consequence, feeling more confident within their communities. Whilst there was a lot of positives, one of the things that we were obviously interested in is understanding girls' agency and choice. What tended to happen by and large, not across all projects, but younger adolescent girls were mainly transitioning into formal education because of the laws and regulations in countries, but older adolescent girls were largely going into work-related opportunities. And what we found was actually there were a significant number of girls that would have wanted to continue with their formal education, but were dissuaded from doing so. And likewise, once they entered work-related opportunities, very few countries from the case studies that we focused on went on to non-traditional vocations associated with men because of the expectations of what their future roles should be. And again, you have an example of a married girl who kind of talks about that lack of choice and the impact on her transitions. So last slides, just really thinking about the reflections for the future design of girls' education programs. So what we've seen is tremendous success, but these projects are time limited, and thinking about how it's the most marginalized girls that we're working with who require a lot more support beyond just the LNGB project lifespan. What this requires is more of a commitment, a longer term commitment. And two ways of doing this would be, for instance, more of a collaborative working approach, not just with education actors, but also other ministries, including the Ministry of Labour. And then also sustained engagement with community stakeholders to try to help shift some of the gender norms which negatively affect girls' participation. So just a quick example on the green bubble, whilst there was positives, the fact that girls were becoming more independent as a consequence of bringing in income actually meant that there was a threat of violence, for instance, from family members. And secondly, the policy environment needed to demonstrate the political commitment for these programs that we're focusing on to allow girls back into education, and their transitions into work is also needed. So what's really positive is that on the three case studies that we're focusing on, the countries within which they're working in have that policy environment. And what was really positive was actually how the Leave No Girl Behind projects help shift government opinions around these programs as well. Just one example is how, for instance, skills pathways are often seen as less desirable than formal education, but seeing what that was capable of achieving for some of the older girls actually helped shift the mindset around that. So that concludes the end of the presentation. Thanks for listening, and Pauline, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you so much, Asma, for that excellent presentation, really clear. And I know a lot to put in, but I think sort of the messages have come across really clearly. And as people could see, there was a flavour of the voices that were along in the slides there from the girls themselves, as well as from other key stakeholders, as is on this slide here. This, as I mentioned earlier, this is part of a sort of range of studies that both the Independent Evaluation is doing, as well as the fund manager. For those, I think, looking at the chat, I think probably most people here are familiar with the Girls' Education Challenge. In case you're not, Sandra, if you wouldn't mind just putting up the link to the Girls' Education Challenge website, more generally. And there are also the information on the studies themselves. And Emma, I think you were going to share some of the links to related studies and briefs that the fund manager has done, because the fund manager has done a lot of thinking around the conceptualization of different forms of pathways and programming. And actually that was the basis of our own study. We used that to inform the structure of how we went about the study. So there's a lot of synergies there. So without further ado, I'm going to now hand over to our three partners who are going to give their reflections. These are people who have, a lot of experience of working on the ground. So be interesting to hear their views as to the extent to which some of these findings resonate and other thoughts they have. So you each have 5 minutes, and I'm going to start with Eliza. If you wouldn't mind by just introducing yourself and the project that you're with, so that everybody knows. And if you're able to, I know there can be bandwidth problems, but if you're able to put your camera on. And I think, Asma, we can now take down the PowerPoint if that works for you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. And Asma, it was a very nice presentation. I'm Eliza Tuladar from Nepal, and I'm working in People in Need as a project manager in project LNGB, and we call it Aramba in Nepali, which means the beginning or start. So we are helping the girls here to start their new life through education. Uh, the presentation was really nice, and there were lots of things that were captured, which we were able to derive from the project. Uh, and I just want to give a small reflection on what we are doing in Aramba in LNGB project in Nepal. So we are supporting the girls in formal education and in technical and vocational trainings through this CLC, non-informal education. What I felt in this presentation also, and in our working area also, I felt that the criteria that you have set for these marginalization, that might be different in different contexts. As for Nepal, we have the caste and religious categories that might put people into different types of vulnerability. That might be different case in Ghana and other areas as well. But these are also some influencing factors that can put people in vulnerability, that I wish to see in the report also. And I feel that the education, working in the education sector is not for like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. It is not sufficient to work in these in the sector of education to actually achieve the desired results. So we have to invest more time, more capital, more resources, and more technicalities with more innovation, as these factors are very much integrated and embedded with the social norms, gender stereotypes, and the mindsets of the people with the orthodox cultures and norms. So these are very much complex things that needs years to change, and it is very difficult to people to change the mindset of people. So these 2, 3, and 5 years is not sufficient. We have to uh, hold the hands of these girls to take them, pull them into the education sector, support them in every step, and actually get the result after they are graduated, and they get some position in the community uh, that we need to ensure. So I hope these are the recommendations that you have also put in these in your comments. And finally, last thing I would like to say that yes, you have captured a lots of things, including these education. You have captured the voices of the change champions and other interventions of the parents, of the local government that we are working with. These are all stakeholders that plays a very crucial role, and also the men of the community who are considered said to be the decision makers in the community. So these people are also very important, and their role in changing the communities are very important. Uh, uh, Changing the mindsets of the people and our approaches and innovations, how we implemented the project and the difficulties we faced during these implementation, during working with the government, working with the communities, working with the men, and what approaches we adopted to actually cope up with this situation, that are also important, that I hope these all are included in these reports also. Yes, thank you very much. I'll pass my I'll pass to Pauline.
Thank you, Elisa. That was really excellent. I think the sort of real nuances of what happens within the programs themselves is really important. The issues around the specific vulnerabilities that really sort of projects work with very carefully and closely, as well as the sort of ways of which you work with the communities, and understanding sort of gender isn't just about working with the girls and women, but also with the men, and addressing those issues around social norms. So thank you so much. So
Yeah,
many things.
can I add just one point? I
Sure,
just
carry on.
forgot to say. Just I want to understand if this is included in report or not, and that some intervention that might work in some areas and that might not work in another area. Uh, uh, for example, what works in Nepal might not work in Ghana or some other area, and some intervention that might work with some beneficiary might not work with another type of beneficiary. Uh, that
Yeah.
the difference that would be included also in the report also. Thank you very much.
That's a great question. We'll come on to answering it when we answer the other questions. So I've made a note of that one. Thank you, Elisa. So, Willem, if I can turn to you now. You're able to unmute yourself and, if possible, put your camera on.
I can. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks. Elisa, thanks for your presentation. That last comment on contextualization is something that I agree with 100%. So my name is Willem van der Wal. I'm a technical advisor for World Education. And in this capacity, I've supported the strategic approaches to girls' education project in Ghana. Just out of curiosity, I'm seeing a whole lot of names in the chat. Who here in the call is from Ghana or is working in Ghana? Maybe just give me a thumbs up or write it in the chat if you haven't done that yet, because I'd really like to connect perhaps later on. Let me start by saying that I really appreciate this study. Particularly, it's focused on listening to the girls and their communities, getting their perspective on how our projects have supported them and what we should do better. Actually, reading this report and listening to Asma talk, I'm sure we would do some things different in the future ourselves, because there's much work to be done. We've seen in Ghana, approximately 1.2 million children are not attending school in 2021. Specifically, 25% of female youth were not in education, but also not in employment or training, and it's the highest among the 3 countries in the study. So that's really should be alerting us for the need to change. We found that I think well-known barriers, financial constraints, insufficient parental support, there's corporal punishment in schools, low English proficiency, malnutrition, all these things contribute to children being out of school. But we found girls' aspirations were really high once they have support structures in their community. So Stage has provided them with entrepreneurial skills. We've given them a startup grant. We've given them access to raw materials. We gave them bicycles when they live far away. However, I would say, though, that the community support, that is really the most crucial in the long run. And I want to highlight a few things, given there's only a few minutes to reflect. What we've seen is too often interventions to provide formal or non-formal education for children, they focus on the individual itself. And in many countries, many African countries, community life is still dictated by the Ubuntu principle. Not sure if you've heard of that, but in short, it means an individual becomes someone through their community well-being and interconnectedness that is more important even in many cases than the individual. And for this reason, we've included in stage activities to explain the benefits of girls enrolling in stage and getting employment for the whole community. We've helped caregivers also in specific interventions. We've given them access to farming subsidies, for example. We strengthen community safeguarding systems to the benefit of the whole community. And very importantly, we've engaged communities in the initial mapping exercise to identify marginalized out-of-school girls. Because in our experience, they're often overlooked. They're simply not counted. Even if you ask, are there any children that should be in school here? They're not thinking usually about teenage mothers or children with disabilities, because yeah, they're not part of their mainstream thinking. So once engaged and supportive, girls' aspirations change to beyond what we had expected. They're out of school, often in their home, caring for their children. A lot of them were teenage mothers. But they aspire to enter into further vocational skills training after they've gone through our program. They set up their own businesses. Some of them decided to work in groups to pool resources, increase production. I don't want to repeat what you can read in the report. You should definitely look at it. It's very interesting. But coming back to the fact that there's work to be done, I want to call upon colleagues and donors, authorities to really prioritize complementary basic education in Ghana. There's a lot of good work already done since a long time, more than a decade. But the current budget allocation, it's less than 0.1% of the whole education budget, is not enough. Now, two more things. As we've demonstrated in stage, older out-of-school youth needs to be given the option. Yes, I agree, Asma, what you said. They need to be given the option to go into formal education. But many of them, in our experience, they want to learn a skill. They want to gain an income. Not all girls aspire to go back to school. And often there's a need, right? They need to care for their child. They need to care for their family. So what we've done is we improved a community-based apprenticeship model where we had community-based master craftspeople who would organize vocational skills training. And this is really talking about contextualization. This is culturally appropriate. It's already an existing practice in Ghana. We merely enhanced it, improved it. And also because many of these out-of-school youth, they simply cannot enroll in a 2-year TVET course far away from their communities, often their boarding schools. It's not possible. It needs to be shorter and focused. And our profitability studies, I'm going to pass the link in the chat in a bit. It shows that bread making, pastry baking, hair braiding, weaving, and things like that, 85% of the girls reported that it gave them enough money to become more independent, invest in their future. The last thing I want to highlight, I don't know how much time I got, but
you are out of time, so maybe just this one very quickly, Willem, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Is focusing on the most marginalized group, girls with more severe disabilities. We've done research. Girls with more severe disabilities go into special needs education. And many of these schools are under-resourced. They're boarding schools. Parents need to pay on average $450 to provide transport, hygiene kits, and so on. No parent we've worked with has that kind of money. Teachers are not trained in those special needs education schools where girls are given vocational skills training as well. Less than 25% in the school for the deaf learn to sign. Less than 20% in the school for the blind were trained to read Braille. So again, look at the report on the website to learn more. Feel free to contact me later on. I'll stop now. Time to run out.
Thank you so much. Sorry to cut you short on such an important.
No, it's fine. I understand.
And please do put links on the chat. I can see others have been too, so that's really helpful for sharing resources. So Collins, I'm now going to hand over to you to hear your perspectives. And again, if you wouldn't mind introducing your project briefly.
Thank you very much, Ross. I hope you can all hear me. My name is Colin Solan from ActionAid, and we were implementing the Education for Life project that came to an end March of 2023, sorry. And this was a project that was working with girls who have been to school and dropped before attaining basic literacy and numeracy, and also girls who have never been to school. I think my reflection on the project would be one. This was one of the most successful projects within, the country and the region. And one of the things that I want to share with the team here is one, at the point of identification and selection of marginalized girls, I think it is important for you to get, or for one to get it right at that point. Because selecting a girl who, and then enrolling a girl in a project who does not meet the criteria of marginalization, does not meet the criteria of either having been to school and dropped out before attaining basic literacy and numeracy, or never been to school at all. That one worked for us because we were able to deploy tools that enable us identify the right girls. And this was even going beyond, looking at the literacy and numeracy competencies at the point of entry, and then also working, screening the girls using the Washington group of questions, so that we just establish, the aspect of disability among the girls. And another reflection that I wanted to mention here is that projects need to appreciate the marginalization subgroups. And I think that really worked for us, because what we did realize is that at the point of the design, you almost think that, one intervention would fit all. But as you are entering into implementation, then you realize that you are dealing with different subgroups. And these subgroups, you need to meet them at individual level. So we are having young mothers who have children with very specific needs. You have to meet those needs so that they can progress with their literacy and numeracy and therefore transition. In the catch-up centers and in the project, you have girls who have different categories of disability. You need to meet each and every need of the individual. So that really worked for us, and we were not taking the girls as an homogeneous group. We had girls who were married, who then, for example, if you look at how we structured our literacy and numeracy sessions, we did take into cognizance that some of these girls who are married, or some of these girls who have children, they also have other obligations at the household level. So you would find that our classes were not running Monday to Friday. We were having 3 days in a week, 3 hours in a day, so that the girls are also freed to also do other things that they needed to do at the household level. Another thing that I also want to reflect is that besides the literacy and numeracy, I think it is important to also address the aspect of life skills, because a lot of the girls that we did enroll in the project, they had faced, for example, violence previously. So when you have this girl here, and then you subject her to the literacy and numeracy sessions without really addressing the past occurrences, then you'd find that you are bound not to meet your objectives. So it was a balance between literacy and numeracy, and also addressing circumstances and the situations that the girls are either going through at the moment or went through, before being enrolled into the project. And that was really, really helpful. And we were working with community mentors who are really people from the community who interact with the girls, who know where the girls are coming from. And they were very instrumental in really supporting us to understand, what are the things that these girls are struggling with, besides the education that you may want to give them opportunity to. And then another reflection would be on community support structures, because these are girls who either have been to school, dropped out, or never been to school at all. So it is important that projects also focus on structures within the community that then supports the girls to progress with their learning. So, for example, you'd find that if you look at our attrition rates, they were minimal because the community structures then enabled us to ensure that either girls who drop out for one reason or the other are traced, tracked, and brought back to the catch-up centers to progress with the program. And then also there are other households that were at some point discouraging the girls to continue. So these community instructors were very crucial and instrumental in terms of enabling the girls appreciate the literacy and numeracy sessions, appreciate the project, and appreciate the need to also put in effort so that they may advance with what they really aspire to. As Education for Life project, another thing that was very instrumental was to listen to the voices of the girls. And we had sessions every week where it was an open space, a free space, where girls could express themselves. We are glad that we were implementing a project that was very adaptable, so we could adapt whenever a situation or a circumstances presents itself that would mean that we tweak or we change our approach. And this really was beneficial to the girls. And that is why we also realized very high, rates of transition. Because we realize that if you don't listen to the voice of the girls, then it means that you may lose them along the way. And then lastly, issues to do with systemic change. I think it is important also to focus on policy. And as a project, we did focus on policy in collaboration with the Ministry of Education. We have come up with an accelerated education guidelines that then will support learners who either drop out of school and would not want to go to formal schooling. So in brief and in conclusion, Pauline, what I would want to mention is that we had a very good project because of the adaptability and also just to connect with the girl at every stage of the project. Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you so much. And I think all of those three interventions have really helped to contextualise both what's in the report and beyond what we can cover in the report. So thank you so much. I'm now going to hand over to Erin, who is going to be giving her sort of reflections of having been a sort of critical friend to the report, if you like, and as I said, having vast experience of this in your own work. So over to you, Erin.
Thank you so much, Pauline, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm Iram from BRAC Institute of Education Development in Bangladesh. And now, what we heard today from Asma was, about the findings. We hear that, this focused a lot on all 14 projects focused a lot on the marginalized. And then we also heard that, one of the main challenges that the girls faced was about finance. And also what we heard is that, there was this huge, integration, not only of the girls in the individual households and families, but also communities and government officers. And I think all of this really resonates with what has happened in Bangladesh. Now, in Bangladesh, when I joined in this education sector in 1992, at that time, we all heard, I used to hear all the time that, in primary education, the survival rate was only 30%. And, the preference was for boys. So, in 30%, one would hardly find any girls. Now, for secondary education, the enrollment itself was only 20%. And there were so few girls. So, that was the context in 92. But, I think over the last 30 years, Bangladesh, the situation has changed dramatically. And one of the projects, one of the big programs that has changed this has been the Female Secondary School Stipend Project. Now, the Female Secondary School Stipend Project, it started in 1982, and it was being piloted in 1982, and then it was scaled in 94. Now, when it was scaled in 94, every year it was targeting and it was enrolling about 2 million girls. And, the focus was on girls entering into grade 6 to grade 10. And so it scaled up in 94, and it is still going on. Now, when it scaled up in 94, after that, there has been Asian Development Bank's analysis and report. And according to them, it shows that, there has been a 13% increase in enrollment every year. which is different because it is showing that in comparison, it was only a 2.5% increase for the boys. So obviously, we also need to work for the boys. But this 13 million increase, this 13% increase every year has resulted that, last year, the enrollment of girls in secondary education was 54%, and the total the net enrollment now is about 72% in secondary education, of which 54% are girls. Now, the report also shares that, the analysis also shares what we knew and what we have been seeing is that there has been a consistent, achievement of girls in secondary education. From 2000 to 2017, girls have absolutely surpassed the boys. Now, this year, there was the grade 10 examination, and in the grade 10 examination, girls passed, the number of girls passed was 81%, the number of boys who passed was 78%. There have been also other implications.
Sorry to interrupt you. You're going to have one more minute. Thanks.
Oh, okay. All right. So the thing is that, there have been many implications of this female secondary school stipend project. But I think that, there have been also in terms of, female participation in labor, in really decreasing the fertility rate, etc. But I think what is really important is that this project has been going on for about 3 decades on and still going on. And so I absolutely, I heard that Eliza said that, this is not about a project. It's about absolutely investment for decades. And I would just like to share that these are investment for decades. Thank you.
Thank you for that very powerful message there. And I think that links well with some of the things that other colleagues have said and is going on in the chat here about the investment for decades. I think that's a good slogan, maybe as a report title. And I think sort of Willem and others have made the point about the very small budgets that go to this. And I think there's also been going on in the chat some issues around what can we expect in a short time frame. In particular, actually seeing girls even going to these traditional roles is revolutionary in its own right within this time frame. The agency and choice that these programs have given the girls and young women, I think, is notable in that respect. I'm going to sort of pick up on a couple of points in the chat to start with. Do keep them coming, but there was one sort of quite earlier on in the chat about the link between education and poverty and what's been done in the programs in relation to that. And the second was a point that's come up several times, including from Eliza and others, about the issue around the different types of marginalisation and which are quite context specific, and whether and how these should or can be also undertaken in other types of contexts. And that relates to the point on the graph as well that will show that those that have never been to school, actually their literacy and numeracy improved more than those that had dropped out. So was there anything specific that targeted them? So over to Asma for those questions, and thank you for those that put them in the chat.
Thanks, Pauline. And yeah, thanks so much for the presentations and the really, really great questions. I think they're really food for thought. I think beginning with the financial aspect, poverty and the projects themselves. So actually in our findings, we were obviously trying to capture girls' voices in the rivers of life. And through that, one of the things that was really stark was actually how many girls before joining the Leave No Girl Behind programme had identified how financial or poverty related issues really impacted on their participation. And you sort of see how that reduces over the time frame of the Leave No Girl Behind project. But there's obviously the big question, and I think the big worry that was coming out from girls both on the work-related pathways and community members who we interviewed as to what next when these projects actually stop. And one of the things that was quite interesting in a couple of the studies, I think, was actually when we were, for instance, talking to community members, of which obviously some of these community members are also the parents of these girls that are part of the LNGB project, it was also about supporting parents in terms of being economically able to support girls in their their education journeys beyond the project. So I believe Collins in the Education for Life programme and Willem in the Stages programme, there was actually a training element that was given to caregivers to actually allow them to withstand these economic shocks which negatively affect girls' learning. So beyond that, in terms of sustainability, one of the things may be to kind of explore that a bit further, I think. So that was really interesting. Now, in terms of the interventions, Eliza and others, thank you for the really great questions in terms of the context specificity. So what I think within the LNGB projects, a lot of the learning interventions were standardized across, for instance, girls who had never been to school or girls who had dropped out. But what we actually found when we were doing the intervention mapping was many of the projects were actually giving targeted support to specific girls with specific levels of marginalisation. So again, in terms of just an example, girls with children, I think there was a lot of support given to girls with children in terms of childminding services once they were enrolled on the Leave No Girl Behind project at the Learning Centre, but also when they transitioned onto skills training after they left the projects. Eliza, your question about how some of this, may work for specific girls, specific contexts, and I think even within the Arumbra project, in our interviews, what was really interesting was some of the community sensitization did actually have positive impacts in terms of perceptions around child marriage for certain ethnicities and maybe not for others. So there was a real reflection with the stakeholders that we were interviewing as to how we need to maybe go further for some of these groups where these interventions aren't working. I will stop there and pass back to you, Pauline.
Thank you so much, Hansper, for that comprehensive response. And there are some other points that are coming up in the chat. I think sort of partly this point on the investment for a decade is picking up momentum, and it's partly about questions that then relate to, okay, how do we address this through broader systems change, and also questions related to budgetary support that's being given to these sorts of programs through government systems, etc. Just as a sort of perhaps another bit of advertising, our next independent evaluation study is going to be on sustainability, so watch this space. Obviously, for the Leave No Go Behind window, some of these projects have been going for a shorter time, so whereas those that are in the Girls' Education Transition window have been going for a longer period, and so we feel that that's going to be something quite interesting to look at, where those projects have received support over a longer period of time and to the extent to which they have their own momentum and sustainability. But I think the point on budgets that Willem made is also one that we do bring out in the report, in terms of there being very little budget that is included for these types of programs. And there's a point here also about the extent to which they're sort of included in education planning. I think that's something that we've been looking at over the years in different ways. And while they may be increasingly mentioned, they still are not fully integrated and recognised. And I think, I'm sure Erin from experience of BRAC and Bangladesh will have a lot of knowledge about that, given that the sort of long time period that has taken to be understood and included. I'm just now looking because there's some new questions that have come up. So just if anyone, Asma, if you see anything that you're... So I'm just seeing the one from Judith about whether we have done any research into the girls who don't benefit from these projects enrolled. And those projects enrolled but don't thrive, improve their scores or change their life aspirations, and for whom it does not change their lives. So those that don't actually benefit. I don't know, Asma, if you've got any thoughts on that.
Sure, and thank you for that question, Judith. So yeah, as part of the study, actually, we did, it wasn't just the girls who transitioned onto education or livelihood journeys, we also did want to capture the voices of girls who had perhaps dropped midway through the programme. So one of the things I think that really came out starkly was actually the very same barriers that these girls were facing prior to joining the project, or also those that they continue to face in the learning centres. Just as an example, a few that I can think of, those girls that were maybe older, and in terms of the gendered norms relating to girls' participation, this was quite interesting because I think in terms of shifts in what these older adolescents' role should be, and linking that to the Leave No Girl Behind projects and education, there were still those embedded norms that really discourage these girls. So amongst the dropouts that we interviewed, many of those were of the older cohort. But I think we did also find, for instance, I think this came out more in some of the LNGB projects more than others, but some of the reproduction of the challenges that these girls had faced in their participation in schooling before joining the LNGB project, i.e. Distance or household chores. I think household chores was actually the one that was identified the most amongst girls who dropped out of the LNGB project for the reason that they dropped out. So you kind of see that these barriers don't completely go away, but we are able to kind of split out between girls who did transition onto the various pathways and, Judith, the girls that you're talking about who didn't necessarily complete the projects.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you, Esma, for that response. There's been some sort of points in the chat about indicators and sort of tracking progress, and it just reminds me of a webinar I was on yesterday, which was about the Sustainable Development Goals and progress, and I was a bit struck about discussion on continuing to track progress in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals on gender parity, and very narrowly on gender parity. And I think part of the richness of these projects, as well as the sort of thinking that goes on behind it by all the different partners, is about the importance of thinking beyond these very basic indicators. I think this programme, the Leave No Girl Behind programme, has been really important in not just focusing on the learning centres themselves, but also what happens to girls next. And that continued trajectory and support has been so vital and is actually, as we know, quite unique in programmes of this kind. And I think it would be really great if we can sort of collectively think about what some of the indicators, these longer term indicators, are that we can and should be tracking, not just for programmes of this kind, but also more globally, because, you know, these are such vital issues for the girls. I'm just checking with colleagues on any final questions that we have. There's one about questions about research done on girls' education living in refugee camps. I don't think we covered that explicitly in this report, but Emma, there might be some other links that you want to put up to that from the other work that the fund manager has done. And I know that we've got colleagues from INEE on the call here who've done a lot of work in this regard. There was also some points that were made earlier, and I think is also in the chat, about the importance of focusing on disability. And when you mentioned about the importance of including children with severe disabilities, the last study that the Independent Evaluation did was focused on disability, and that has now been published. I think Sandra can probably put that in the link if that's okay. And this current study is also including issues around disability as one of the obviously really important factors that affect the most marginalised, but the previous report goes into that in a lot more detail. So I think we're almost at time. Just to mention then that in going forward, as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be sharing this information with you all. There's such rich information that's been going on in the chat there as well. Thank you for all those conversations that you're having, not only with us, but also with each other. And I think that's what also makes this Girls Education Challenge programme so unique, is the learning that we all share. We're really looking forward to sharing the study with you, to receiving your thoughts and further engagement, and also to sharing our thoughts and getting your feedback on the future studies that we're doing that include the one I mentioned earlier on sustainability, as well as a really important one on value for money, that will be addressing some of the issues also related to discussions we're having here about the longer term costs and benefits, including in relation to the Leave No Go Behind window. So I'd like to just close by thanking all of the implementing partners who have engaged with us on this study, particularly the 3 that we heard from just now. We know that this is an extra sort of piece of work that you do with us, but it's so rich and so important. And to Erim also for sharing your thoughts on the importance of thinking in the longer term and the experience that BRAC has had in that regard. And of course, to all our independent evaluation team members, those that you can see on the screen here, and many others, as well as to the funder manager for all of your support, and FCDO, of course, for funding us all and making sure this learning goes far and wide. So we will be in touch, and thank you again for all your engagement.